In 1871, a small town welcomed an orphan, but this child wasn't what she seemed. She whispered names of the dead. She revealed secrets no one should ever know. And when the town ignored her warnings, the sea rose, the shadows moved, and the dead came back to claim what was owed. This is the chilling story of Catherine Doyle, the child who knew the town's darkest secrets. They found her on the cliffs, alone, barefoot, hair tangled, eyes too dark, eyes that seemed to see everything. No one knew her name. No one knew where she came from. But the moment she spoke, everyone froze. She whispered a name no one had said in decades, a man long dead. And she knew exactly how he would die. The Doyles were supposed to help her. Her quiet family living at the edge of Marrow's end. They thought they were saving a child. But from the first moment, they realized they might have brought a curse into their home. The first night, Catherine didn't sleep. She wandered the halls, bare feet on the floor, whispering names, whispering events, things that hadn't happened yet. Just a child, Margaret Doyle whispered. But even she felt it, the dread crawling up her spine. The townspeople noticed. They started avoiding the Doyles. The girl is cursed, they said. The sea has given her eyes no mortal child should have. Father Mallory, the priest, came to see for himself, skeptical. But when Catherine stared at a wall and said, "He will fall tomorrow," even he paused. The next day, the man fell. From the cliffs, alive but shaken, everyone whispered. Everyone feared her. At night, Catherine walked again, whispering to herself, bare feet. The same words over and over. The tide remembers. The tide remembers. Her adoptive parents didn't understand. No one did. But they felt it. Something was coming. Something unstoppable. By the third night, it wasn't just predictions anymore. She began speaking secrets the town had buried. Names of the dead. People who had vanished. Horrors no one remembered. And her voice. It wasn't always her own. Sometimes it sounded like someone else was speaking through her. "You cannot hide," she whispered. "You cannot hide from what is remembered." Margaret Doyle wanted to ignore it. Thomas Doyle couldn't. Every whispered name, every prediction, every shadow that moved when no one was there. It was too real. Then came the first real warning. One evening, Catherine stopped in the middle of the room, eyes wide, voice trembling. Not at her parents, but somewhere else. The cliffs will take someone soon. Someone who thinks they are safe. The storm outside rattled the windows. The house felt empty, dead, cold. Margaret held her breath. Thomas's hands shook. And Catherine, she smiled. Not cruelly, calmly, like she was expecting it. By the end of the week, it was clear. Catherine Doyle wasn't just a child. She was a warning. The town of Marrow's End had welcomed an orphan. But she wasn't just a girl. She was something else, something old, something the sea itself had sent. She spoke secrets, secrets no one should ever know, and every word pulled the town closer, closer to a truth they weren't ready for, because some secrets refuse to be forgotten and some children are not children at all. By the morning after her first warning, the town was buzzing. Everyone whispered about Catherine Doyle. Everyone feared her, but nobody wanted to admit it. Not even the Doyles, because what she said next wasn't just a prediction. It started at breakfast. Catherine looked straight at the baker's apprentice and said, "You will see him again, the one who should have stayed buried." The boy froze. His hands trembled over the bread. He didn't know what she meant. Nobody did, not yet. That afternoon, Father Mallory returned. He wanted answers. He wanted proof it was all coincidence. But when he arrived at the churchyard, Catherine was already there, standing alone, staring at graves nobody had visited in decades, names forgotten, dates that made no sense, and yet she spoke each name aloud. Every single one. Thomas Harrington, drowned. Eliza Crowley, vanished. Jonathan Marsh, burned. The priest shivered. How could she know these names? These deaths? They were ancient history. Or so he thought. Then it happened. Shadows moved around her. Faint whispers filled the graveyard. A cold wind tore across the stones. And Catherine, she smiled. Not at the priest, not at the Doyles. At something unseen, Something waiting. By nightfall, she was different. Her voice wasn't always hers. Sometimes it echoed like dozens of people speaking at once. Children, women, men, voices from the past. She whispered about betrayals, about deaths that were never solved, about sins the town had tried to bury. Margaret Doyle watched, terrified. Thomas Doyle wanted to leave, but Catherine wasn't finished. They lie beneath the earth, she whispered, and the sea remembers. All of them, waiting for justice. The first real shock came when Catherine led Margaret to the cliffs. Her small hand gripped Margaret's tightly. She stopped at a jagged rock, pointing. "There," she said. "Oh, that's where it started," Margaret squinted. There was nothing, just the grey sea churning below. But Catherine's eyes, they glowed faintly in the moonlight. "Someone caused it," Catherine said softly. "Someone greedy. Someone who should have been stopped. The town had never known. The shipwreck. Decades ago. Everyone had thought it was an accident. But Catherine knew better. She had seen it or remembered it, and then she spoke a name. Thomas Doyle froze. His face drained of color. He knew it. He had buried it. Everyone had. But she had found it anyway. "It was you," she whispered. "You made them drown," Margaret gasped. Thomas opened his mouth, but Catherine wasn't done. She spun on her heel, pointing at the cliff edge. "The tide remembers everything. The dead will rise if the truth is not told. The living cannot hide." From that night on, strange things began to happen. Windows rattled for no reason. Doors opened on their own. Shadows moved against the candlelight. Animals avoided the Doyles' house. And Catherine, she slept less and less, wandering the halls, whispering names and events nobody could understand. By the end of the week, the town was terrified. Every villager avoided the Doyle house. They said the child was cursed, that she was the voice of the dead, that anyone who crossed her would suffer, and Catherine, she didn't care. Or maybe she did, but it was impossible to tell. She simply knew, she saw, and she spoke. "They are coming," she whispered one night. "The ones the sea remembers. They will not be silent forever." Margaret and Thomas held each other, terrified. But deep down they knew. The nightmare had only just begun, because Catherine Doyle was not just a girl. She was the keeper of secrets, the voice of the dead, and the town of Marrow's End was about to pay for every hidden sin. By now, everyone in Marrow's End knew one thing. Catherine Doyle was no ordinary child. The streets whispered her name. The wind carried her secrets. Even the sea seemed to obey her. It started with shadows. Not ordinary shadows. They moved when there was no light. They twisted, curling toward her, stretching like fingers. People claimed they saw shapes in the windows of the Doyle house, even when no one was inside. One night, Catherine walked out of the house and into the churchyard, alone. Margaret and Thomas followed, hearts pounding, but they couldn't stop her. She moved, as if pulled by something unseen. She stopped in front of a grave that had no marker, no name, nothing, but she knelt and whispered, "Jonathan Marsh, you were betrayed." And then she spoke another name, and another. One by one, every forgotten victim of Marrow's End's long-buried sins came to her. Margaret gasped. "Catherine, how do you know these names?" Catherine looked up, eyes wide, voice trembling but not hers. "I remember," she said. "I was there. I saw them all. And they will not forgive." That night Father Mallory tried a séance. He hoped to quiet the girl. He hoped to calm the town. It failed. Catherine sat in the center of the candlelit room. Her eyes rolled back. Voices poured from her mouth, hundreds of them, layered, overlapping, impossible. Children screaming, women crying. Then shouting, she named names. She told stories of betrayal, greed, murder, and theft. Every secret the town had tried to bury came alive in her voice, and then the worst thing happened. The doors slammed shut. The candles went out. Darkness swallowed the room. When light returned, Catherine was gone. Margaret screamed. Thomas ran outside. Father Mallory searched every corner, but she had vanished for hours, until the wind carried a whisper. The tide remembers. The tide never forgets. Catherine had returned at dawn, wet, muddy, standing on the cliffs as if she had walked through the storm itself. Her hair clung to her face. Her eyes glowed faintly. She looked at the town below. "They are coming," she said. "The ones who died, the ones you forgot, the ones you betrayed. They want justice." And then, as if to prove her words, the sea roared. Waves crashed higher than they should have. Boats rocked violently, even in shallow water. The horizon shimmered with figures, shapes rising from the deep. Ghostly, silent, watching, Thomas Doyle's face went pale. He understood. Every secret he had buried, every crime he had hidden. Catherine had found it. Margaret grabbed Catherine, shaking her. "Stop this! You're scaring everyone." Catherine shook her head. "I can't. They speak through me. They need their names told. They need justice." The town awoke to whispers that night. Some people claimed to hear faint cries from the sea. Some claimed shadows moved inside their homes. Some swore that when they looked out their windows, they saw figures standing silently on the cliffs, watching. Catherine never explained what she saw. She just spoke. She just walked. She just reminded the town that the past refuses to stay buried. "You think you are safe," she said one evening, voice calm, almost smiling. "But the dead remember. The tide remembers. And the tide always comes back." By the end of part 3, one thing was clear. The girl was no longer just a child. She was a bridge, a vessel, a warning, and Marrow's end was running out of time. Catherine Doyle was no longer just a child. She was a force, a warning, a voice for the dead. That night the wind howled like the cries of the drowned. Margaret Doyle couldn't sleep. Thomas Doyle tried to pretend everything was normal. But Catherine, she was different. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Her whispers carried through the halls. "They're coming," she murmured. "They know. They remember." Then she did something impossible. She led Margaret to the old cellar beneath their home. No one had been down there in years. Dust hung heavy in the air. Cobwebs clung to the corners. And there, in the shadows, Catherine stopped. "Look," she said. Margaret squinted. Papers, charts, ledgers, old ship manifests, names, dates, everything meticulously written. And the names matched the dead. Every single one. People who had vanished. People who had drowned. People who had been forgotten. Margaret gasped. "Where did you get this?" Catherine didn't answer. She just pointed to one ledger in particular, a thick leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was unmistakable. Thomas Doyle's face went pale. His hands trembled. He recognized it. The ledger that recorded the shipwreck of 1849, the cargo stolen, the lives betrayed, the men who caused it, the sins he had buried. Catherine's voice trembled with something deeper than a child's fear. "You remember," she said. "You tried to hide it, but the tide, it never forgets." Margaret stared at her husband. "Thomas, is this true?" He could not deny it. Every crime, every betrayal, every life stolen by greed. Catherine had uncovered it all without a word from anyone, without a hint. And somehow, she remembered. She remembered the ship, the drowning, the screams. The storm outside grew violent. Thunder shook the house. The sea roared like a beast awakening. And Catherine, she walked to the window, staring at the waves. "They wait," she whispered. "They wait for justice. They will not forgive. And they will not stop." Margaret clutched her daughter. "Catherine! Please, we can fix this. We can—" "No," Catherine said. "You cannot fix what the sea remembers. You cannot hide from what the tide will take." The next morning, news spread across the town. Fishermen claimed to see ghostly figures in the waves. Children spoke of whispers carried on the wind. And everyone who had crossed the Doyles felt a chill. Catherine didn't stop there. Each night she read the ledger aloud. Names, dates, betrayals, every secret the town had hidden, every crime the sea had recorded. And the house shook. Shadows moved. Doors slammed. Candles flickered violently. Thomas Doyle knew it was only a matter of time. The dead would rise. The sea would claim what was owed. And Catherine, she was the voice calling them back. Margaret begged him to do something. "Confess, tell the town. Make it right." Thomas shook his head. Pride, fear, guilt, he couldn't. And the sea would not forgive. That night, Catherine walked the cliffs again, alone, barefoot, whispering names of the dead. The wind carried her voice to the town below, and the water responded. Waves rose higher than the cliffs should allow. Something moved beneath the surface, shapes, shadows. Eyes watching, waiting. Catherine turned to Margaret and Thomas, her small face pale but determined. "They are coming," she said, "and there is nothing you can do to stop them." By the end of Part 4, one chilling truth was undeniable. Catherine Doyle was not a child. She was the reckoning, and the town of Marrow's End was about to pay for every secret, every betrayal, every life stolen by greed, because the tide remembers, and the tide never forgives. The storm came without warning, not a drizzle, not a gentle wind, a tempest that tore across Marrow's End like the fury of the sea itself. Waves slammed against the cliffs, windows shattered, roofs shook, and in the center of it all, Catherine Doyle stood barefoot, hair plastered to her face, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She didn't flinch. She didn't hide. She simply watched. "They are coming," she whispered. "The ones who died. The ones you betrayed. The ones you forgot." Margaret clutched her daughter. Thomas tried to steady himself. But the house, the town, even the air itself trembled. The first to disappear was Old Man Withers, the fisherman who had lied about the shipwreck to cover his father's greed. He stepped outside to check the storm. That was the last anyone saw of him. The tide claimed him, pulling him into the depths with a scream that echoed across the cliffs. People ran. Doors slammed. Windows rattled. The sea was rising, unnaturally fast, washing through the streets like it had a mind of its own. Shapes appeared in the water, shadows of the drowned. Silent figures watching, waiting, and Catherine, she laughed, not a child's laugh, not innocent, a sound that sent shivers through every bone in the town. "You cannot stop it," she said. "The tide remembers, and it always takes what is owed." Father Mallory tried to intervene. He raised his crucifix, shouted prayers, tried to calm the storm. But the air laughed back. The waves roared louder than his voice, and Catherine's whispers carried over everything. "Justice will be done." Margaret grabbed her husband. "Thomas, do something! Confess. Tell them. Admit the truth." Thomas fell to his knees. Tears streamed down his face. He had hidden the ledger. He had buried the truth, and now the dead were rising. From the waves, ghostly figures began to emerge. Faces pale, eyes hollow. The drowned, the betrayed, the forgotten, all walking on water, silent, relentless. Their gaze fixed on the town, on those who had wronged them. On the Doyles, Catherine stepped forward, arms outstretched. "They remember everything, and they will not forgive." The first of the townspeople to vanish were those directly connected to the shipwreck, descendants of men who had lied, stolen, and killed. The waves took them swiftly. No one could resist. No one could fight it. Margaret screamed, "Catherine! Stop this!" But Catherine shook her head. "I cannot. I'm only the voice. They are the tide, and the tide always comes back." The night dragged on. Houses flooded. Streets disappeared underwater. Shadows moved in every corner. The town was falling apart. And still, Catherine stood on the cliffs, silent but commanding, as the dead rose from the depths to reclaim what had been stolen. By dawn, the destruction was complete. Boats smashed on the rocks. Buildings collapsed. The streets were unrecognizable. The survivors were few, trembling, soaked, and haunted. Catherine looked at the horizon. The sea calmed, almost peacefully now. The tide had taken what it was owed, but she did not smile. She did not speak. She simply turned and walked back toward the Doyle house, leaving a trail of whispers in the wind. The tide remembers, always, and one day it will return. Margaret fell to her knees, sobbing. Thomas lay on the floor, broken, and the town of Marrow's End would never be the same, because the child had spoken and the tide had listened. The storm didn't stop. It only grew worse. Marrow's End was a nightmare. Streets flooded. Houses crumbled. Shadows moved in every corner. And from the depths of the sea, they came, the dead, the betrayed, the forgotten, walking, rising, silent, relentless. Catherine Doyle stood on the cliffs, barefoot, hair soaked and plastered to her face, eyes glowing like fire on water. She raised her arms and the tide answered. Waves crashed higher than any storm should allow. The air was electric. The sky blackened. The tide remembers, she whispered, and it will take what is owed. Margaret clutched her daughter. Thomas fell to his knees. He knew the truth. Every secret, every crime, every life stolen. And now, the sea demanded payment. The first scream ripped through the town. Old Mr. Withers, the fisherman, was dragged under the water. His body vanished before anyone could reach him. People screamed. They ran, but the tide, it didn't care. It took whoever had sinned, whoever had hidden, whoever had betrayed. Catherine's voice rang out above the storm. Not just hers, but theirs too. Hundreds of voices, children, women, men, all drowned, all betrayed, all seeking justice you cannot escape. The tide takes what is owed. The dead moved through the streets, silent and relentless. Doors were torn from their hinges. Windows shattered. Shadows crept along walls. And the sea, it swallowed everything. Margaret begged her husband. Thomas, confess. Admit it. Tell the town. But he was too late. The tide had already begun its reckoning. His past, his greed, his lies, all dragged into the waters with him. Catherine did not intervene. She did not cry. She only watched. She was the voice, the conduit, the warning. People tried to flee to higher ground. But the cliffs themselves were no refuge. Waves clawed at the rocks. The dead waited at every edge, eyes hollow, faces pale. Catherine turned slowly to the remaining townspeople. The sea does not forgive. The tide does not forget. You thought you could hide. You thought you were safe. But nothing escapes what it remembers. Lightning struck the cliffs. Thunder rolled like drums of judgment. The living cowered. The dead advanced. And Catherine's small voice carried over the chaos. Justice is coming. One by one, the guilty were claimed. Those who had wronged the shipwreck victims. Those who had lied. Those who had stolen. Those who had betrayed. Screams echoed through the night. Shadows danced across the waves. Margaret and Thomas watched frozen as the last of their neighbors vanished beneath the surging tide. Then silence. The storm receded. The waves calmed. The sea returned to normal, but the town was unrecognizable, ruined, empty, destroyed. Catherine stood alone on the cliffs, the first rays of dawn glinting off her wet hair. She looked down at the devastation, eyes glowing faintly, voice soft but certain. The tide remembers. The debt is paid, but one day it will return, and with that she disappeared. Not into the waves, not into the storm, simply gone. Margaret fell to her knees, trembling, clutching the ledger that had survived. Thomas collapsed beside her, broken, haunted. The town of Marrow's End was silent, empty, dead in more ways than one. But Catherine's whispers lingered. On the wind, in the waves, in the shadows, the tide remembers. And somewhere, far below the cliffs, the sea waited, patient, relentless, watching, because the child had spoken and the tide had answered. The storm had passed, but the town of Marrow's End would never recover. The streets were empty, buildings shattered, boats crushed against the cliffs. The air still smelled of salt, fear, and something unnatural. Margaret Doyle wandered through the ruins, clutching the ledger Catherine had shown her. Names, dates, sins long buried, all accounted for, all claimed by the tide. Thomas Doyle sat on the cliffs, staring at the calm sea, silent, broken, guilt etched into every line of his face. He had survived barely, but his soul would never be free. And Catherine, she was gone. No one saw her leave. No one knew where she went, but her presence lingered, in the wind, in the shadows, in the quiet lapping of the waves. Villagers who had survived whispered of glimpses, a small figure on the cliffs at night, barefoot, hair tangled, eyes glowing faintly. And always, that same voice, the tide remembers. Some claimed she was the spirit of the sea itself. Others said she was a curse, a punishment for greed, betrayal, and lies. But everyone agreed on one thing: she was not a child. Marrow's End never recovered. Families left. Businesses closed. The town became a place of whispers and fear, haunted by memories of the storm and the child who had called it. And yet, Every so often, something strange would happen. The wind would carry voices, faint, overlapping, impossible, names long forgotten, secrets long buried, and anyone who had survived felt the pull of guilt. The weight of the tide's memory, Margaret Doyle finally understood. Catherine had not come to punish indiscriminately. She had come to remind the living of what the dead remembered. The tide never forgets, Margaret whispered, repeating the girl's words. And it always comes back. Thomas Doyle shivered. He knew she was right. Every hidden crime, every stolen life, every lie, remembered, recorded, waiting. Some say that on stormy nights, when the wind howls and the waves crash against the cliffs, Catherine Doyle returns, barefoot, silent, watching, whispering names of the living who have forgotten their debts. No one knows where she goes after that. Some say she walks into the sea, melding with its endless memory. Others say she vanishes into the fog, waiting for the next town, the next sinners, the next tide. Marrow's End became a ghost town, a warning. A place where people spoke only in whispers and avoided the cliffs, where the sea always seemed to be watching, listening. And the ledger? Margaret kept it, a record of the past, of sins and secrets, of lives taken and debts paid. She never dared read it again. She simply waited, knowing Catherine Doyle's work was far from over, because the girl had spoken, and the tide had answered. The last words still echo through Marrow's End. Carried on the wind, through the waves, into the cliffs, the tide remembers, always, and one day it will return. Some townsfolk claim they still hear her at night. A small voice, soft but certain. A child's voice, warning the living, speaking secrets no one should ever know. And if you ever visit Marrow's End, if you listen carefully, you might hear it too. The tide remembers, and it never forgets.